So, I'm willing to bet a fair few people out there remember Fable, even if you didn't play it. Some of you might even misremember it as the first game with a karma system, and there's no shame in that, because the game was heavily marketed on its innovative, choice-driven morality system, with choices and choices. Like the edgy choice to be a badass murderer, or the choice to IDK fart on someone. Knights of the Old Republic 1 predates Fable by about a year, and as a Star Wars property, of course it had good and evil via light and dark, and as an RPG, it obviously had choices. So Fable isn't actually the first, and obviously light side and dark side and alignment charts for D&D are old. And while I'd argue that the morality of the Star Wars universe is pretty flat and binaristic, Fable doesn't get any points for how it sets its own morality up. All that said, the morality system of Fable is not the point of the video directly. We're going to address the way the intersection of money and morality as intrinsic features creates an interesting worldview. But in order to do that, let's lay down some basic Fable staples for those who need a refresher, to organize their thoughts, or have simply never seen the games before. Games in the Fable series are recognizable by three things. 1. They are comedic adventure RPGs with life sim elements not necessarily common to the genre at the time the series began, like home ownership and marriage and having a child. 2. The games center on the struggle of good and evil, with karma points awarded for many different actions, pulling the player in either direction as your actions are judged. Again, while being less than serious about it all, this is not some actual moralizing guide to right and wrong. And 3, the games are a disappointment by design. Now, that third one might sound like the most contentious point, but honestly, it's the most consistent feature of the series. It might also come across as fighting words, but there's no true hater of Fable like a Fable fan. Those of you familiar with the series and its development probably already know what I mean. Point 3 will be especially relevant for discussing Fable 3, which is where this is heading, if you couldn't tell by the provocative and exciting title of this video. Amid these three elements is a gradual slide, a secret fourth element, the transition from Fable 1, an RPG concerned with making moral choices, largely driven by its combat, to Fable 3, the benevolent landlord simulator. A lot could be said about the way Fable has gradually shifted away from things like functional armor and stats to cosmetics and customization, and the tension as it keeps simplifying its experience system and really everything in the name of some kind of streamlining, but that's liable to become a massive digression, so for now I'll say this. Fable 3 is far more interested in management than it is in the RPG mechanics of the first game, to such a point that the fact combat is in the game almost feels vestigial. It isn't, of course, the game cares about weapons and magic and all that, but it's simpler. The short version is that streamlining Fable has disproportionately seen the combat get shaved down, which, to be honest, is a bold and interesting move, given that games tend to do the opposite, and that's why we have like a 3-to-1 ratio on combat-driven games to everything else. The upside to something like this is that mechanics like social interaction might see more complexity as they get more attention, as attention shifts away from fighting as the most meaningful form of interaction with the world. But people who've played this game know that sadly this is not the case here, and social interaction remains a limited mechanic.
Yeah! Yeah! Woohoo! Whoa!
I really need some... Oh, good. Thank you. I can't wait to...
So in the absence of combat and social interaction as the driver of gameplay, though they certainly do still exist, you might be wondering what's left. The answer is money, or more exactly, earning it. Which you absolutely need to do because money is the sole deciding factor on if you get the good ending. Good is in quality. I know it's confusing because good and evil are otherwise used to delineate the types of endings, but stick with me. Good in this case as opposed to a fail state. The obvious follow-up to this is to ask, how does one earn money in Fable 3? And the answer the game provides is, oh, there are so many ways. Explore, kill, make pies, trade, kill, But as I'll demonstrate later, the only efficient way to get the kind of cash needed for endgame is via management, or to use the proper and ideally derogatory term, landlording. Originally, a tremendous portion of this script was assigned to the task of exploring the stories and stakes of all the Fable games. I'm going to save that for the other video I plan to make on Fable 3, which is a more generalized critique. What I will take away from that segment is this. Fable 3's story is a two-parter, centered on revolution in one phase and rulership in the other. The end goal is essentially to defeat an existential cosmic threat that cannot be reasoned with via a GoFundMe campaign. Or I guess it's closer to one of those 1 like equals 1 tree planted type things, which is why today's video is sponsored by Wren. For that reason, having a heap of capital becomes very important to the endgame and the moral decisions throughout. Peter Molyneux, the founder of Fable's Lionhead Studios, and somehow only the second worst bald guy named Molyneux I can think of, was asked in an interview about the direction Fable 3 was going to go in. He specified that he thought of the game as having 2 distinct phases, the aforementioned revolution and management phase. And that's novel. It actually, on paper, sounds like a candidate for telling the story of idealism crashing into pragmatism and hard realities of revolutions that now have to grip the reins. But if you've already heard of Peter Molyneux before this, you probably know the most important thing about him, which is that he is a man of vision, not substance. I tried to find the original source for this quote, but it seems to have been a Lionhead Studios news post and is lost to time. So we have this screen cap from the Fable 3 wiki, which is corroborated by forum post quotes from 2009. Whenever politicians, rebels, or juntas are climbing to power, they make promises, and very often these promises are not delivered on. We want to give a sense of that. So, as you're building up your forces, as you're being a rebel, you will find this opportunity to promise things to get more power. Then, after you've become leader, the opportunity to live on those promises has real consequences. Followed with this portion also on the screen that I couldn't corroborate, but stands to reason. I'm begging video game wikis to be IDK actual wikis and have citations, please? From all that, you can kind of see that there was meant to be more depth and a bigger gameplay shift to the latter phase of the game. Entering speculation mode, it actually feels like that's part of the inspiration for the map UI and how it's designed like a military map for the sake of revolution planning, but also for the sake of having movable and changeable pieces. That perhaps one was once envisioned as able to change what buildings stood where, what they looked like, to make things more your own, your kingdom. If you want to know more about Molyneux and his tendency to overpromise, there's a video by James Stephanie Sterling from 7 years ago on the subject, as well as presumably 1,000 rants across all manner of message boards and social media and Steam or something. Wherever mad gamers were in 2012. Game FAQs, probably. There's 20 tangents I'm suppressing about how this game is a heap of failed promises, but again, constraining all of that to the future video. For now, let's get back to what I said about the distinct phases and talk about your actions before becoming monarch. This phase of the game is about going to different areas of the map in a strictly linear order, to be clear, and meeting the leaders of a community, being tasked to nebulously earn XP, which I guess represents the number of people who like you, kind of like a fame level in Fable 1, and described in one conversation as the number of supporters you have. After getting past X number of guild seals / XP, you are then tasked with a more distinct quest and eventually made to promise something to the person in charge of whatever group you're courting to your cause. Let's go through all the promises now, and then later I'll show how they come back. Promise 1. Restore Brightwall Academy. Promise 2. Protect the dwellers and their homeland. Promise 3. Restore the old military to their place. This won't come back. Promise 4. Help the poor. Kinda everywhere, but more so just Bowerstone, which is broader and not constrained to one decision. And Promise 5. To protect the people of a southern desert landmass who have been dealing with the existential threat for far longer in exchange for their support in revolution. Each of these promises is made so that you might have a swell of supporters, primarily in a military respect, for your revolution. There isn't, like, a part of the game about befriending the lumber camps or miner groups for raw material access. This isn't realistic to how actual revolutions need support across sectors, not just pure manpower. But either way, at the end of the revolutionary arc, you are asked if you want to put your brother to death or not, with a single person advocating to let him live, purely out of a sense of them holding the moral high ground, a real they go low, we go high moment. This decision is your first sample of the system that is to come, and like the rest of the system, you can kind of feel that there was supposed to be more knock-on repercussions for your choice here. But they didn't make the system that way. Choices are often isolated and effects immediate and tangible. I would be shocked if it was envisioned this way, as toothless as we get it, and not more just how things ended up due to unknown limitations. Sorry, this all sounds tangential, but it's important to the landlording gameplay stuff, I promise. After the revolution, and your choice regarding your deposed brother, who you can let live so he can vaguely promise the support of his men and stand in the background of important cutscenes, never saying another word till the absolute end of the game because they didn't want to actually let any choice in this game carry consequence.
Today we fight for Albion!
For Albion!
You get to make more choices. There's another unsourced bit of the wiki which claims the original vision had repercussions for being away from the throne for too long, gallivanting around the countryside and whatnot. But in what came to be, the game is kind of the same from here on, in the sense that you can still wander about and adventure. You are, however, handed a schedule with a line dedicated to telling the player there's X days till the invasion. You only have a year to prepare, but time moves at the same old pace and you can laze about or go on little quests with no repercussions, which, as stated before, was not the original vision. You are tasked in this time with making choices about the condition of the realm, the hard and difficult decisions like whether to fund an orphanage or profit from opening a brothel. And then the game whisks you into another month. You don't play out each day. On the one hand, I can see the merit in having a very concrete timer at the top. It lets you get your ducks in a row and prepare as well as you can, testing your ability to shore up funds and defenses and all that. But on the other, I can see the value in a game where you're arguably a bit blindsided and how that would add a lot of tension. But the game ends up with the worst of both options because despite telling you have a year, you don't actually have any indication of what that means. It sounds straightforward, but this is how it jumps around. 365 to 339 to 294 to 252. You can see how this is going at a relatively steady pace so far, roughly 30, 40, 50 days at a time, and then down to 121 and 1. The end is so abrupt that you turn in a quest about collecting a statue for the treasury at day 121, and then suddenly you're just done being allowed to contribute to the defense and the invasion is happening. Like, you skip a third of a year. In the PC version, it turns out, they had a thing where the end didn't just blindside you and you were able to make last-minute adjustments. But for me, that wasn't the case, and given the integration of the game with the defunct Game for Windows Live, very few people will ever experience that quality of life improvement. Anyway, here's where the Landlord thing comes into play, and also, we're gonna do some math. So, in order to save everyone, you need a total of 6.5 million gold in the treasury. If you make all the good guy choices for your country while also donating the proceeds of certain quests to the treasury rather than your personal treasure hoard, your treasury ends up at about a deficit of 2 million gold. In light of that, you would need 8.5 million of your own funds donated in order to save all the lives in Albion. If you do all the evil choices and don't pocket the money from the treasury, what a compelling third dimension to add to the morality. The treasury will be at 4.45 million gold, meaning you only need to inject 2.05 of your own money to save every single person you can. This number goes down if you still donate the quest trinkets I mentioned before, all the way down to only needing 850k of your own money. Being a neutral ends justify the means character is really the only way to get that 850k figure, both gutting the land while not needlessly hoarding treasure. Kinda the route your brother was trying to take. Tangentially, this game doesn't really expect neutrality is an option.
Two paths lie ahead. You may keep the promises you have made and be known as a benevolent ruler. But understand that doing so will leave little to spend on the kingdom's protection and may lead you to disaster. It is not easy to be popular and keep the treasury full, unless you are willing to sacrifice your personal wealth. But you may also choose to break those promises. to harm your people in order to save them.
And again, there's a weird tension in the way the evil path is just ends and means and all that. Conversely, one could be the kindest, sweetest, gentlest, nice guy in the world and come up monstrously short of the goal, even when making some of the tough choices, or like, less morally objectionable ones. I.e., keeping all your promises to the people who helped empower you, but still building that brothel, I think. I don't know, Paige doesn't have just one promise ascribed to her the same way the other people do. Point being, building that brothel is, to the game, an evil choice. The game makes shades of gray by putting black and white next to each other and telling you to cross your eyes. If viewed in terms of human lives, building the brothel equates to a difference of 1.3 million more people surviving the existential threat. Even if you take the long-term good argument about the orphanage, it's kind of a given there would be far fewer orphans in need of aid if an additional million people survived the attack. It's such a mess that it doesn't even know what cardinal directions are on its moral compass. We'll come back to this because now it's time to talk about earning. On paper, there are a few ways to make money in Fable 3, some more tedious than others. For now, let's just jot down some of the ways that earn that minimum 850k, maximum 8.5 mil, and delineate these methods by things like actual profit versus tedium and moral concern. Now it's been 12 years and the wiki still basically says do any of these other methods in order to buy property, because all the others are far more labor intensive for far less profit. The most labor intensive you'll see is the suggestion of working a minigame job to put yourself over a threshold, or as something to do while waiting for the passive income to roll in. Let's do some quick work about how long it would take to earn even the minimum of 850k without landlording. First off, it should be noted that the earnings of a job are gated by one's progress through the game. Jobs have levels, and those levels are not unlocked via job performance, but by story progress. Now, even if you were an absolute god at hitting the A button at the right time, with the most profitable job at its highest level, you'd only make 3.24k per sword smithed, and you'd need a perfect combo of 10 swords without a mistake in order to get to that wage. That's not nothing, but it would mean having to forge just under 250 swords at a sustained perfect combo at the highest difficulty with the latest unlocked tier of work, level 5, to earn the minimum save everyone value. Mind you, if you're doing the swords forging thing, you need 10 times as many to save everyone while making the good guy choices, which isn't just 10 times the swords, it means sustaining the perfect combo for 10 times as long. Okay, so what if we mix methods here and add in quest rewards and like the money from silver key chests? 225k can come from silver key chests if we're counting strictly the cash they hand us, provided we aren't pawning every weapon and item we get, which is a bit hard to calculate because of how the weapons are semi-random. This cuts our total needed all the way down to 625k, which is just shy of 200 swords when accounting for the money earned on the way to the perfect multiplier. Though that adds more swords, and getting the math perfect isn't gonna really change the argument. Hey, so this is an RPG, allegedly. What happens when we factor in that staple of the genre, quest rewards? Well, the quest rewards are low, certainly unremarkable at the least. We're talking like 500 gold if there's a reward at all. Even evil quests, framed as dirty work for dirty money, only give like 500 to 1,000 gold. A majority of quests only give guild seals or maybe an item that you can pawn for a small bit of cash, nothing that makes a dent. So quest rewards are kind of a bust from the money angle. But that's not counting chests and dig spots found during the quest, which could be considered part of the reward. The thing is, they would be almost impossible to calculate because the chests and dig spots are largely random. The gold they give is usually around 300, but on occasion I've seen more. The items, again, sell for little, and it wouldn't be realistic for a player to be expected to pawn every single thing they got. Some chests in the game have what we'd call a loot table in another game, meaning there's a narrowed list of specific items that can show up, so like the legendary weapons chests will always give a legendary weapon, but generally it's hard to estimate how much one makes from chests, digging, and exploring. Missing from the list so far is trade, which has two components, I suppose. One is trade where you buy low, sell high to one of the 3 pawnbrokers in the game. Except you can't just buy out all the stock at once or buy 15 at once or something. You have to click a button every single time to buy and sell the item one by one. Such is the game's dedication to not having menus, which is tedious, and the profit is inconsistent. I don't know, I get it. Games in general have done a historically bad job making trade anything more interesting than like fast traveling after learning what goods sell well and where. Mount and Blade is one of the better trade systems in terms of wandering merchant life simulator, and it's not even stellar. Again, like jobs and quests, this is low reward. The second form of trade is between players, but I've never really done it before, so I can't speak on it, and I kind of doubt it's a game changer. So that's it for trade. I feel like I'm forgetting something, or blocking it out because it's the worst option. Combat in Fable 3 doesn't provide loot, but that doesn't make it devoid of earning potential because of a handy perk some weapons have where they earn you money when you hit enemies. The issue is that it's literally 1 gold per hit, which is meaningless in the scheme of earning millions. Like, I could go back to my save and see how many creatures I killed for an estimate, but I bet it doesn't go over 5,000. In fact, let me check. 3.2k. Now, near half of those kills are Hollow Men, and I'm pretty sure 100 or so of those come from a minigame where you don't use a weapon, so IDK if those would count. And then of course there's the issue that spell kills all don't count for weapon hits, and rather handily, the game does break down how many kills came via what source. And from what I have, there's a fairly round 1990 kills from non-magic, non-minigame sources. Assuming very generously that each kill takes an average of 5 hits, and very generously that every single kill was made with a moneymaker weapon, that's not even 10k earned via killing across the entire playthrough. So, again, another method that isn't worth factoring in. By the way, this whole section could have largely been avoided by just showing the results of my near 20-hour playthrough. Suffice it to say, landlording is the only true path and is likely expected of any player. There's a skill you need to obtain for owning homes, and a separate one for owning businesses, which means that the mechanics are as notable to gameplay as the jobs, yet far less of an XP sink by the end, while also reaching max earning potential far sooner. Given all the stats I've laid out, I'm completely comfortable calling landlording non-negotiable in a playthrough that expects to end with any money in the treasury. So it's probably time to finally explain landlording. Now, full disclosure, I failed to get the 6.5 million needed to save everyone in my good landlord playthrough, largely because I forgot the game jumps from 121 days left to 1. If I knew it was coming, I would have probably just bumbled around a bit more, tried to collect more keys and shoot more gnomes, and that would have meant a lot more money earned because you earn money from property every real world 5 minutes spent in the game. By endgame, I was earning somewhere around, I think, 70k every 5 minutes.
Thanks so much.
I'm up to my neck in a barrel of fish.
And it could have been more if I was more diligent with fixing up tenant homes, but seeing as I embraced landlordism, having half my properties at 0% condition by endgame seemed natural. This game sells itself on morality and choices, so how does it account for landlords in terms of ethics? It doesn't, really. I mean, you can lower rent and earn some positive morality, or raise it and get negative morality, but the act of owning property itself goes unquestioned in a moral dimension. Well, aside from that one NPC I walked past.
The rent's par for the course. But why do you own the house that I live in? Is that morally right?
That line makes me wonder if someone on the design team felt landlording should be immoral and snuck that in under an earlier draft. For my playthrough, I was landlord neutral, which means I didn't raise or lower rates, and I still made about 9 million off of rents. If I had known the end was coming when it was, I could have sold off a third of my property and covered the last mil I needed to save the whole of Albion, but that wouldn't even be necessary if I just, again, bumbled around a bit more, spent like 1 more hour playing. Okay, but let's get into something real-world landlords love to counterbalance with: expense and investment. And let's do a bit of math here too. In the game, every home has a condition, and you get paid a flat rate of rent until the condition hits 0. Condition is measured from 0 to 100% and goes down 1% every 5 minutes when you get paid. Easy math for us, that's 100 payments. Now let's take some example houses from the early game. Note here that there aren't any skill modifiers in the game that make landlording even better later on, aside from the fact shops are better than houses because they lack durability and thus an upkeep. Of course, the sooner a house is purchased, the more opportunities it has to pay the buyer, meaning more money, just not due to any factors other than time. Here's a house in Brightwall with a funny name. Every name in this game is an attempted pun, but okay, tangent time. I don't think I get why Fable is so obsessed with chickens. I mean, the first game your starting name was Chicken Chaser, sure, but they are very confident chickens are the funniest thing in the world and should be the mascot of the game. Enough so that the opening is about a chicken, one of the best weapons is a chicken gun, and the load icon is a chicken. I know the answer to this, but are the British okay? Back to maths. The House of Cluck costs 11,218 gold at 51% condition. As soon as it was purchased, the value went down to 10,096 for whatever reason. It has a rent value of 592. That means without repairs, the house will pay back 29,600 gold, or nearly 3 times its value before it needs repairs. This would be across the span of 250 minutes, or 4 hours 10 minutes playtime. Of course, the house would continue to earn after that, but it would require repair investment, which is, as far as I can tell, always fairly marginal, around 5 rent ticks of gold to get from 0 to 100%. A few things affect the rent: the property itself, the furniture within, and some hard to deliberately alter economic value of the town/area. So sometimes the value goes up between ticks, but generally this isn't going to have the biggest impact. Technically, a neutral way to squeeze more money out of homes is to micromanage furniture, but I suspect that it barely pays off, both in terms of being more investment with diminished returns and in terms of the actual time to micromanage. I've already made the case that landlording is the best and really only way to make good money in-game, but I thought I'd just back that up with some numbers. Sorry if it got a bit dry. So what exactly is the big deal here? Why does it matter that landlording is a good money source? Let's cut to the chase. Is Fable 3 intended as some neoliberal hellscape of morality and idealized capitalism? No. In order to be that, it would have to be more well-designed. If anything, the game is far too muddled in its messages and mechanics, too thoughtless in its impact and repercussions, too unsure of its own goals. That's the only way I can justify how we ended up with a game supposedly all about morals ending up in a good versus greater good quandary centered entirely on bank accounts, when the furthest extent of evil is to let people die for your own monetary gain, with which you can do nothing because everyone is dead, effectively only serving to vastly weaken your own standing as a literal monarch empowered by the strength of one's nation. There is no proper temptation to evil in Fable 3. Your actual incentive to listen to Reaver in all his suggestions is rather weak. Imagine being a monarch and an absolute monarch, the person who owns the kingdom, and being told you could ruin the kingdom which you already own in order to save its people, or if you're sneaky, to pocket the money for yourself for reasons. Page argues that turning the lake into a strip mine would deprive Albion of beauty and deprive its citizens, your subjects, of that beauty as well. But as I mentioned before, that feels like a really hollow examination of the situation, where the only houses near the lake are worth anywhere between 20 to 100 times the average house in the game. I can barely think of a parallel to the real world here, aside from essentially repeating the circumstances, or I guess with a little creative liberty, it would be like turning a golf course into an oil field. Putting aside how the game presumes a moral value to things like sex work and drinking and all that, there is a stranger moral value given to things that, on the face of them, many of us would just call good, right? For example, the preservation of a landscape if you don't actually need the resources it might have under it does seem like an obvious good, but this game has the context of an impending existential threat. The peril that sets the whole second half of the game in motion ought to be considered in any moral choice from there on. Fable 3 does not do this. To Fable, it would still be evil to build the strip mine, even if, in theory, the strip mine, the removal of the lake that served a rich community almost exclusively, saved 1.3 million lives in a time of crisis. This isn't even Fable's usual comedic imbalance of morals, where murder is 10 evil and divorce is 500, nor is it like the broader video game karma system confusion around relativity, things like how stealing from the murderer gangs in the wasteland of Fallout New Vegas is considered evil, where killing them is good or neutral. The let the world burn form of evil only really works when your endgame source of power isn't dependent on the existence of a society. Normally, this trope is reserved for moments of blind madness at worst, miscalculation in the middle, or knowing sacrifice at best. By that last one, I mean things like using some demon ritual to sacrifice a town in order to gain eternal youth. Something which a character in Fable literally did at one point. Conversely, and as already stated, this means that goodness with poor planning just gets everyone killed unless the player wants to spend hours grinding out minigames. This leaves us in a world where the best and most benign way to not only thrive as a single person, but to save the world without ruining it is, in essence, by monopolizing all business and shelter in the kingdom, turning Albion into the real-world Duchy of Cornwall. And there are no consequences to that path, not in the moral sense, but also not really in a simple results sense. People seem to like you and hand you gifts and even consider you their friend once you're attractive and a monarch and wearing nice clothes, regardless of your status of owning where they live. The moral quandary presented by that one NPC only came up once, in passing, with no real intent of being reflected on. I don't know if there are any subtle mechanics that shift from having a monarch-owned economy, but from my playthrough I can say that if there are any, they're downright inconsequential. The overall result of Fable 3's ambition to be part adventure, part management sim is that they only really got partial elements of each. Aside from the 15 times the game asks you to press and hold A or X to make good or evil choices about your kingdom, the only management you can do is via landlording. Your only meaningful interaction with the world and its people is if you own their homes and businesses, and it's really the only way to save them. There's an interview where Molyneux says it's less about morality, as it turns out, and more about choices. For every choice, a consequence. But that doesn't really bear out, does it? I know with Fable in particular, trying to hold the game to the developer vision is a lost cause, but elements of that intent are still important for contextualizing the game we got. Money is, in the end, the only medium by which one can save the world, and it ends up putting you in the role of a nice guy philanthropist billionaire. And only one voice ever questions if it's even dubious to do so. I'd say the politics Fable 3 constructs, while trying to be explicitly political, are childish, but really, a child could probably point out where they fold, unless explicitly instructed to ignore it. I should clarify, I don't think the game is bad because it tried to be different, to move beyond a simple RPG, but it doesn't end up in a good place. I barely even understand what kind of landing they were trying to stick. By involving money as the medium, the morals of a good and evil route both get hopelessly muddled, either by the introduction of a questionable greater good, or by positing that extreme landlord monopolization is neutral so long as rents aren't adjusted. Both of these positions are somewhat at odds with the idea of revolution and promises. Your greater good evil path is only delineated from the full evil path by if the player decides to hoard the money for no apparent reason. And the greater good choices are given a moral angle while still being tied to saving lives. So while the game may judge you for breaking a promise, history most certainly would not in those circumstances. Going in a different direction, there's another conflicted element of Fable 3's world. You can't tell the story of revolutionary ideals crushed by difficult circumstances and one where the thrust is betrayals of the revolution and its ideals in pursuit of power. You, the player, aren't being immoral and lusting for power so much as entering a situation of desperation. It undercuts itself in two directions at once. You're not betraying the people who put you on the throne without an expedient reason. I know this is similar to the point from before, but the circumstances of cosmic horror shadow demon threatening to engulf the world are unprecedented. The game doesn't intersect the cosmic horror threat with the how will you rule question nearly enough. And then all that mess can just get sidestepped by being a landlord, which the game encourages. A series of choices in development just hurtled the game into full finance land, heavily deprioritizing any heroics, adventure, character, exploration, or combat, any of that. There's so much more to say about, like, the conflict of choice and customization and all that, but I'll save it for another day. Thanks for watching all the way through. Sorry this one took so long to get out. I've been, moving and doing life stuff. I've only been in the UK for like 2 weeks at the time of recording, and I've already seen 2 prime ministers and the death and appointment of a monarch, so like, I'm basically speedrunning Britain right now. Yeah, so if you came here from the older videos or just found this one, welcome, hi, maybe do the subscribe thing, or wait and see what another video is like before that, because I can almost promise the, some call it unfocused, I call it broad range of topics on this channel might warrant some investigation before you commit to the bit and hit the sub button or whatever. Thanks to everyone who's been patient and supportive this last month or so, content will be a bit more routine now that I'm mostly set up. We'll see how stuff like figuring out recording times and all that goes. Next time, we're in for something special. Probably. Maybe. Another time in the future, we'll be more complaining about Fable as a series. I have to make playing all the games worth it. I just have to.